What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're jumping in the next part of our Rembrandt, The Light Behind the Canvas, part 2, coming at us from Mikhail. Much love. Definitely get over so Geographics and go so all of the other channels some love. I'll leave them all down below. Let's see what we got. Let's go.
How the shadow of the captain's hand falls over his clothes. The placement
We had to cut it off in a weird spot, otherwise we were going to run out of time the other day.
is a little salacious, but we don't need to dwell because the hand is actually holding a lion with a St. Andrew's cross, the city's emblem. The message is clear. The lieutenant does not outshine his commander. Every gesture, every detail conveys some significance about their relationship. In contrast, the captain's clothes are black, save for a brilliant sash of scarlet and a collar that helps frame his fearsome visage. The captain isn't concerned with the vanities of fashion. He needs his mind clear in order to safeguard his troops. But wait, is that a little girl? And she's got a dead chicken on her belt? Either she's out of place or worn in the 17th century was much stranger than it is
she's
today.
got a
In
dead
actuality,
chicken.
this is Rembrandt engaging in a bit of Dan Brown-esque symbolism, a habit he would explore more heavily in his etchings. The claws of the chicken are taken from the Clovernier coat of arms, and the chicken itself is a pun on Koch's name. The Dutch word for arquebus was klauwenier. In fact, bird claws are also present on the chain of the Amsterdam Company of Arquebuses, a trophy worn by the winner of that year's
That's
award.
super
But she's also holding a
intriguing.
goblet next to an oak leaf. Both images significant to the Cloveniers, is clearly acting as a kind of battlefield mascot. Does the girl's face seem a little mature? That's because Rembrandt has hidden Saskia in there. So how did the public react? It's popular clickbait to state that the Night Watch was rejected and this collapsed Rembrandt's career, but the truth is
It definitely is not the case.
it's a lot more complicated than that. Before we get to that fallout and why it definitely doesn't involve any secret murders, let's talk about the other issues in his life.
We happen to know a lot of people who love that painting. Trouble
In the
in
midst of their dramatic
paradise.
rise in society, Saskia and Rembrandt tried multiple times to start a family. Only their fourth child, Titus, survived infancy. Shortly after his birth in September 1641, Saskia fell ill, probably with tuberculosis, and Rembrandt started having an affair with Gertrude Dix, their maid. Saskia died on the 14th of June 1642, the same year the Night Watch was finally released. Plot twist, her will stipulated that Rembrandt would lose access to Titus's trust should he ever remarry. While still dallying with Gertie, he started wearing Hendrik Stoffels, his second maid, who was also 20 years his junior. Outraged, Gertie sued for reneging on his promise to marry her. She pawned some of Saskia's jewelry, which Rembrandt had given to her, so he had her committed to an asylum. Then Hendrika was excommunicated from her church, and this all happened in just one house. Now you know why artists are such popular subjects for historical romances. The drama is apparently very juicy.
The drama is real.
The popular narrative claims that the Night Watch was rejected almost immediately, which combined with the tragic loss of Saskia and 3 of his children supposedly sent Rembrandt into a spiral of despair. On the contrary, there's no proof that the Night Watch was ever actually rejected. It hung in the Covent
It's most certainly
clubhouse
not
as
rejected
intended.
now.
Now, it is true that he painted no portraits in the decade after, but he may have simply refused all commissions rather than not have been offered any in the first place. He focused on sketches and etchings instead. He did have to use legal measures to compel one subject, André de Schaff, to pay. Having to defend the merits of his work to a court of peers clearly irked him, as he used this episode as inspiration for a sketch depicting everyone involved as a group of arse-eared hooligans, while Rembrandt defiantly wiped himself with their opinion.
Ass-eared hooligans.
Obviously,
I
a
love
change
it.
took place, but the scale and emotional tenor had
They
been
did have some donkey
exaggerated
ears.
somewhat for the sake of a more compelling story. If there's any one external factor that hurt Rembrandt, it was the fruit of the Dutch Golden Age. The children of Rembrandt's original patrons had returned from their fancy international rich kid daycare schools, and they were ready to party. The Peacock generation craved sensual experiences, rich foods, glitzy clothes, loud parties, and they rebelled against every aspect of their parents' stoic simplicity. They wanted nothing to do with Rembrandt's saggy cheeks and oppressive shadows. That was no way for a princess to look. They imported the nascent classical movement from France, which suddenly made Rembrandt's stodgy realism seem all the more drab. He didn't become unpopular, he just became unfashionable. His work was considered praised up until his death, even if it didn't keep up with the trends.
Still praised today. Highly praised today.
Another misattributed detail of his legacy concerns the so-called Rembrandt brown, an almost gauzy earth tone present over much of his work. Most of that is varnish added after his death in order to smooth out the effect of impasto, thickly applied paint that manipulates the play of light on the surface. Varnishing flattens the effect, making the work readable at a wider range of distance, the kind of thing you might care about if you were a gallery owner trying to get the most eyes on the work as possible. The Night Watch suffered the most. Initially, it was a daylight scene, but the thick varnish blotted out much of the color. color. History automatically isn't brown and grimy. Some museum curators simply chose to ice skate uphill. At one point in history, it was so heavily varnished that it successfully deflected a knife attack. The ultimate truth of his fall lies not in some existential crisis inflicted by the loss of his wife, but rather the fact that he was difficult to work with. His contemporaries joked that he would not interrupt his painting to meet with the prince, and no matter how respected an artist you are, having that kind of precious attitude is going to cost you. Talent can elevate you to the upper echelons of society, but cannot compel power to kneel. In every endeavor, if you are unlikable, your prospects will suffer. The antisocial geniuses, too important to bother with social niceties, tend to only be appreciated after their deaths because no one can abide their company while living. Talented, wealthy, jerk.
That's a hell of an interesting way to think about it.
On top of his train wreck of a personal life, debts and spending continued to dog him until he died. On July 15, 1656, he declared bankruptcy. Adding insult to injury, the Chamber of Insolvency, where he made his case, had a doorway crowned with a marble carving of rats crawling out of an empty money box. His house and possessions were sold at auction, but they failed to fully cover what he owed. The only surviving piece of furniture, a huge mirror in an ebony frame, broke en route to the new house. Even after downsizing to a modest cottage, his obsessive collections would again grow to fill 2 large rooms. His bankruptcy stripped him of his guild membership and the ability to work as a master artist, so he only managed to continue painting by setting up a dummy corporation wherein he was the sole employee. To add insult to injury, he was technically owned by his then lover Hendricke and son Titus. So
there's always
how
a
did
way
the man
around
with
it.
Rembrandt's ego cope? Why, 2 years later, he painted himself dressed like a king, and well, you've just got to respect that move.
Ballsy. Ballsy.
One of the most consistent themes of Rembrandt's later works is how he blurred the line between finished painting and sketch. Rembrandt knew how limited the cone of visual focus really is, and how much detail the human mind fills in around it. At the distance his paintings are seen, he knows exactly where he has to place the fine brush strokes and where he can let us do the work for him. He was very touchy about letting people get too close to the work because he knew the effect would be ruined. He often joked about the offensive smell of the paint, but that didn't stop him from cleaning the brushes on the coat that he was wearing. Perhaps the perfect example comes from this painting of Hendrik Stoffels. When taken as a whole, it looks like a normal complete painting. Maybe a little on the saucy side with those bare thighs and plunging neckline.
Definitely a little
You wouldn't call
saucy
this
for the
unfinished,
times.
would you? Let's zoom in on her hands though. What happens here? It looks like she tried boxing a meat grinder. Her thumb is a single brushstroke. Compare that to where her leg enters the water and the reflection it casts below her. Look how fine the detail is. When his critics claim his work is incomplete, they're pointing to contrasts like this. But if the artist decides it's finished, why does it matter that they've left the unimportant details rough and cursory?
Hey, when the artist decides it's finished, it's finished. I mean, it is what it is. That's a complete artwork at that time. It could be half a song. If the person who wrote it says it's done, it's done.
Hands clearly aren't the point of the picture. We don't need to see every branch and leaf in the foliage behind her because they're not relevant. It's not a portrait of a river, it's a portrait of someone bathing. The dirty old man wanted to paint his new flame in an intimate moment, and from this, we got a work of immense genius. While we know him now primarily for his paintings, they never left the Netherlands in his lifetime, and he is one of the few master artists who never studied outside their country of birth. In life, his international reputation was built almost entirely from his line work, producing over 300 etchings and over 1,000 sketches. To this day, he is considered one of the foremost masters of etching, having invented new ways of playing with line, shape, and thickness, even the physical composition of the resin he etched into. Every aspect of his craft was done with intent, always prodding at the absolute limit of his tools. He would work on the same print for years at a time, releasing drafts even as he continued to make sweeping changes to the composition. Bankruptcy put an end to his etchings, though in a mysterious twist, none of his tools or originals were sold at auction. They simply vanished, perhaps sold earlier on the sly or given to a friend for safekeeping. Either way, the majority of the plates that
You gotta do what you gotta do.
lost by the time of his death, though 82 have since been rediscovered. Remember Govert Fink, one of Rembrandt's early students? He had gone on to establish a respectable career producing technically competent histories and portraits, his life relatively free of conflict or strife. He was commissioned to paint a series of 12 canvases for Amsterdam's new town hall, a mix of biblical stories and scenes of mythologized Dutch history. After completing a set of preliminary sketches, he died suddenly and the commissions were divided between his contemporaries. Despite being out of favor with the elites, Rembrandt was chosen to depict the conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, where a former Roman soldier united the disparate tribes and drove the Roman army out of the Rhine. It's a story intimately familiar to the entire country, marking the birth of the Dutch identity. Nascent liberation from Spanish rule added an extra layer of significance to the story, which was experiencing a popular resurgence at the time. It's like King Arthur, but real. That's how important the story was.
It's like
to
King
Rembrandt.
Arthur, but real.
So, of course, he was going to play it safe and not offend anyone. Right? That's certainly what the burgomaster assumed. Here's how Otto van Veen painted the scene in 1613. It's technically competent, but conceptually bereft. There's no surprise, no shock of the new. It wouldn't be out of place in a textbook. Here's Rembrandt's version, looking like an early Magic the Gathering card. Never before had Civilis's empty socket been depicted so centrally. Until then, the tradition was to only show him from the side. And the soldiers surrounding him were grizzled and haggard like real soldiers. These weren't the enlightened philosophers who would usher forth a united nation. These were flea-bitten murderers used to sleeping in a saddle. The sword oath was a detail invented by Rembrandt himself. See how the light seems to bubble up from the painting itself. It hung but briefly before being returned with a vague request to make it more presentable. He probably wasn't ever paid for the work, commissioned on a custom curved canvas measuring over 30 square feet. Instead, he cut out the heart, slapped it in a smaller frame, and tried to market just the central bit. 4/5 have been lost to time, save for the enigmatic sketch on the back of a funeral invitation. An outsider was hired to complete Fink's sketch to hang in its place and slapped together a replacement in 4 days. Rembrandt was unable to find a buyer and set out to sell Saskia's grave. His chance at a comeback came and went. Hendrika died in 1663, Titus went in 1668, and his father followed 1 year later. So I really hope you found that video interesting.
Man, he lost everybody around him before he went.
Please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.
Imagine losing everything. I'm bankrupt. I lost my family. And I'm still going on, but he died a year later, as it really said. The whole thing's very intriguing. This whole Rembrandt journey has been eye-opening. Like before it was just a name, now we're able to put pictures and places and timelines together. I love it, absolutely. I like hearing how anybody looks at Rembrandt, even if it was just some nobody. But hey, definitely get over so Simon Whistler, all the love in the world. Go so Geographics, the love. Go so all of them, the love. All the links are right there inside the description. Smash the like button if you liked it, the dislike button, but I won't believe you. Tell the next one of mine, the Combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe, but let me to the moon, the back. Peace.